When officers Kevin and Christopher were assigned to investigate a light emanating from the abandoned hospital, they felt a deep sense of hesitation. In retrospect, they might have been better off refusing the assignment altogether, as what they encountered inside would leave them both so shaken that they retired from active duty the very next day. No one should ever enter that hospital again. Kevin's hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped his flashlight. He was alone, having lost sight of Christopher some time ago. They should never have split up. How could they have been so reckless? Standing before the hospital room from which the light originated, Kevin had contemplated turning back countless times, but he couldn't leave Christopher behind. What awaited Kevin inside the room? What could have produced the strange light, and what had happened to his partner Christopher? 2 hours before the discovery, Kevin and Christopher were expecting a typical evening, an early night of patrolling the city. They were following the same route they had taken multiple times each week, known as a sleeper route, where nothing ever happened, at least not until tonight. Much of the route wound through industrial areas and older parts of the city, where the population had dwindled over the years. The most prominent building along the way was an old hospital that had been abandoned for at least 6 years after going bankrupt. As they neared the end of their shift, Kevin and Christopher had already driven past the hospital twice that evening. They were barely paying attention when Kevin suddenly spotted something out of the corner of his eye and immediately ordered Christopher to stop the car. From one of the windows of the supposedly deserted hospital, a strange light appeared to be emanating. It was faint, but now that night had begun to fall, it was unmistakable. Neither officer had encountered anything like this before, so they called the station to report it. They were informed that nothing or no one was supposed to be in the hospital and that they needed to investigate. Just the two of them, as no backup was available at that moment. Part of Kevin already felt regret for reporting this. The hospital was enormous, and neither of them had any idea how to navigate it. Plus, by the time they made their way inside, it would probably be pitch black. But they had received the assignment, so they had no choice. Man, would they come to regret this. Christopher parked the car, and the pair started scaling the fence. They had no key to open it, so this was the only way. The climb was much more difficult than they had expected. This place was locked up well, and so were all the hospital entrances. An hour and a half before the discovery, Kevin and Christopher decided to use the emergency staircase and climb through broken windows to enter the hospital. They wondered if anyone was inside and which entrance they might have used. Although they initially planned to search together, they quickly realized it could take all night, and Christopher was reluctant to stay. Against Kevin's better judgment, they split up to cover more ground, staying in contact via walkie-talkies. For the first hour, their search went well, and they cleared the first few wings of the hospital without finding any signs of recent activity. But then things suddenly changed. 30 minutes before the discovery, when Kevin tried to reach Christopher for an update, all he could hear was static. After a little while, this too suddenly stopped. Immediately after this moment, something happened that made Kevin's hair stand up on the back of his neck. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the empty halls of the hospital. There was no doubt in Kevin's mind that it came from Christopher. Something had happened, something bad. He started calling out for Christopher, but received no response, only dead silence. Kevin quickly retreated into a room and closed the door. He called the station to report what had happened. They would send reinforcements as quickly as possible, but as the hospital was relatively far from the station, it would take at least half an hour before they arrived. That was way too long for Kevin. Who knew what could happen to his partner in that half hour? He could not just hide out here and wait. Every second wasted was a second too much in his mind. So Kevin took a deep breath and made his way back into the hallway. 20 minutes before the discovery, he had a rough idea of where Christopher had been when the contact was broken and he heard the scream. With his weapon locked and loaded, he made his way to the staircase and went up a couple of flights to reach the level where Christopher was supposed to be. On his way, he saw a lot of boot prints on the open door. This had to have been Christopher's doing. He was always fairly heavy-handed during these kinds of operations. Kevin was on the right track, and it wasn't long before he found something. When he reached the reception area of the wing, he could immediately see that there had been a struggle here, and fairly recently, as lots of items were knocked over, revealing dustless surfaces. When he came to the reception area of the wing, he could immediately see that there had been a struggle here, and it was fairly recent, as many items were knocked over, revealing dustless spots on the desk and the ground. Then he found the final proof on the ground. It was Christopher's walkie-talkie, smashed to pieces. Kevin could still recognize the police logo on a couple of the fragments. Christopher was in danger, but there was also something that gave Kevin a bit of hope that things might end up all right. He quickly checked around the area of the supposed struggle and did not find Christopher anywhere. This meant that whoever or whatever he had encountered had either taken him or Christopher himself was chasing his assailant. But now, Christopher was somewhat stuck, as Kevin had no idea what direction Christopher had gone or in which direction he had been taken. Kevin had no leads, except for one. He vaguely remembered where the light had come from that had initially drawn their attention. Besides the reception area was a layout of the hospital. Kevin quickly reviewed it and found that the light had most likely come from somewhere in the intensive care department. It was not too far away from where he was now, and he had no idea where else to look. As Kevin made his way to the intensive care unit, he noticed no signs of struggle or dragging in the hallways. Could Christopher have gone willingly with his assailant, or was something else at play? The hospital was difficult to navigate, but Kevin eventually reached the intensive care department. Signs of prior habitation were evident. Seats arranged in circles and old red markings on the walls in a language he couldn't understand. Kevin touched the dried markings, relieved they weren't fresh, but the eerie atmosphere unsettled him. Calling out for anyone yielded no response. Desperate to find clues, Kevin began checking rooms, all of which were abandoned and dark. Evidence suggested that people had been sleeping there recently, but there was no sign of activity now. At the end of the hallway, Kevin spotted a faint light beneath a door. Quietly approaching, he found it locked. Undeterred, he forcefully kicked it open. A flickering light greeted him, and as his eyes adjusted, he took in the shocking scene. The room was filled with lit candles and the same red markings on the walls, but the large pentagram painted on the floor left no doubt. Kevin realized the truth. This was the lair of devil worshippers. He could barely imagine what the cult could have done to Christopher. Stories of devil-worshipping groups in the city had circulated for months, with reports of pentagrams and sacrifices. Now, Kevin had the proof. As he processed the scene, a loud thud came from a locker in the corner. Cautious but determined, Kevin smashed the lock open with his baton. Inside, he found Christopher tied up, gagged, and visibly shaken. After freeing him, Christopher explained that 4 cult members had ambushed him at the reception. Realizing resistance was futile, he had cooperated and been brought to this room. Kevin and Christopher quickly gathered their evidence, but just as they were about to leave, they heard movement and a low humming sound coming from the hallway. Suddenly, a group of cult members in red robes appeared, holding candles. The 2 officers froze for a moment before instinctively fleeing. As the cult members pursued them, they raced down several flights of stairs and finally found an open exit door. Outside, they scaled a fence and reached their car. Within 15 minutes, police arrived and arrested the cult members before they could escape, ensuring no further harm was done. The harrowing experience deeply impacted Kevin and Christopher, prompting both to retire from active duty the following day. The hospital, now heavily guarded, had all traces of devil worship removed, restoring peace to the city. And that concludes this chilling and unforgettable tale of courage and survival. What would you have done if you were in Kevin's position? Could you have confronted such danger head-on, or would you have chosen a different path? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. If you like this story, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your loved ones. Also, subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an update from our channel. Thank you.